Okay, so just carrying on with question 3 then. So still doing normal distribution. Okay, so part 2. We've been told that Alex buys another randomly chosen chocolate bar this time, so not necessarily 160 grams like was last question, just another randomly chosen chocolate bar. Find the probability that this chocolate bar has a weight of less than 145. So really we need to understand what the distribution is doing, okay? And we need to say, okay, the distribution has a mean of 150, so if I draw this out, literally distribution like this, has a mean of 150, so 150 is in the middle, and then obviously 5 standard deviations each side. So the idea is, well, okay, what's the probability that it is less than 145? So in other words, it lies in this particular interval in there, okay? So I guess first things first, we need to work with this in some way, right? Now there are a couple of different ways that we can work with it. The way which I want you to work with it, just to show you're working and show that you understand what you're doing in the exam, is to standardize. In other words, I want you to take this distribution, which is currently a mean of 150 and a standard deviation of 5, or variance of 5 squared, and translate it into a distribution which is Z is normally distributed with a mean of 0 and a variance of 1, okay? So that's how we change it, and we call that process of taking this distribution to this distribution, we call it standardizing. The reason being is because there are tables that we can use to figure out what those values are, okay? So if we want to find the probability that our randomly chosen chocolate bar, which is following this distribution, so X, is less than 145, you notice in this case it doesn't matter whether it's less than or equal to, right? Because it's continuous. So I want to figure out, well, okay, how can I translate it so that it's now on this new distribution with a normal distribution of 0 as the mean and 1 as the variance? So can anybody remember, how do I take this 145 and how do I standardize it? How do I find the Z value?
So you want to center it, so you
Yep.
remove the mean from it.
Good, so wherever the 145 is at the moment, shift the whole distribution, so instead of being centered around 150, it's centered around 0. Good, so I'm going to take away the mean, which is 150, then what?
Divide by square root of the variance or standard deviation.
Yeah, perfect, exactly. At the moment, this distribution, it's centered around 0, sure, but it's too wide, it's too far stretched out. So I need to stretch it inwards so that it only has a unit of 1 as the standard deviation instead of 5. So I need to divide by square root of the variance or just the standard deviation, okay? Well, in this case, that's nice and easy. That's just going to be negative 5 divided by 5. So Z, in this case, is going to be negative 1. All that literally means is that 145 lies 1 unit of standard deviation below the mean. That's all that Z value means. But what it does mean, though, is that when I go to my tables, I go, okay, well, this is exactly the same as the probability that this distribution, Z, is less than negative 1 instead. Okay, so 145 becomes negative 1 on this distribution. So all we need to do then is just pop over to our tables. So I'll just quickly pop those up. There we go. So I want to first of all find negative 1. So I'm going to be looking at the first table, table A, which is all to do with the negative standard deviation values. And if you remember, all I need to do is just take negative 1, and I want negative 1.0 in this case. So it's just the first column of that negative 1 row. So that's going to give me 0.1587. In other words, that's about 16%. Okay, so just things to remember when we're going through this. First of all, does that process make sense? What we've done there?
Well, yeah.
Yeah?
Yes.
Okay, good. Things to remember when you're using your tables. Remember, your tables are always cumulative. In other words, they are always less than. Okay? So if you wanted to work out a greater than probability, you'd have to do 1 minus. Does that make sense? Right? So yeah, as long as it's less than, you're okay. If it's not less than, do 1 minus. Okay? Other thing to remember is I want you to lay your working out like this in the exam. Okay? So you have to lay your working out like this. You have to show the fact that you've standardized and that you've used the tables to figure out these probabilities. However, you also have access to your probability calculators. All right? So if you come into your probability calculator on GeoGebra and come up to normal, which is the top one, and I simply just pop in the mean, which in this case is 150, and the variance, well, okay, it's asking for the standard deviation, so I'm just going to put 5. And I want less than, so I'm going to use the left-hand interval. So I want x is less than or equal to, in this case, 145. That still comes out as 0.1587. Okay, so it's still exactly the same probability. Now, you see that process is a lot easier. Just simply type the relevant numbers in the right places, okay? You cannot just do that. So you cannot just say probability that x is less than 145 is equal to 0.1587 in the exam on the basis that GeoGebra told me to. Okay, you have to show this working. You have to show the principle of standardizing. Exactly, find the Z distribution, right? So yeah, so you have to put enough working down to convince me that you understand what you're doing.